person, yes. He has done some church planting. That's church, not literal, whatever. But he is a former employee of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Soil Conservation, served as the soil scientist, soil conservatism, anyway, from 72 to 90, he was the director of the USDA Appalachian Regional Plant Materials Center Farm in Quicksand, Kentucky, from 1980 to 1990. He's co-developer of 5 named new plant variety releases. Worked for the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, Washington, D.C. from 1990 to 2002. Compiled agriculture, horticulture, floriculture, and aquaculture production information for the USDA. Are you all writing this down?
No, I'm
agriculture statistics.
Any pens or pencils? My pen's not right.
Service in Kentucky, New York, and Southern New England.
I got one.
He has currently served as, or serving as Vice President and Environmental Consultant for Tompkins Research and Management Consulting 1990 to date. Project Neptune received the Electrical Industry Outstanding Environmental Project of the Year Award in 1996. He's a graduate of the University of Rhode Island College of Resource Development, BS in Natural Resources in 1974 graduate. Member of the Agronomy Club, Soil Judging Team, Student Senate University Christian Fellowship. He also has a BS in Anthropology and Archaeology from the University of Rhode Island. He is the organizer and president for both the URI Archaeological Society and URI Adventist Student Fellowship, etc. Was selected a URI Coastal Fellow in 2002 and 2003. Was a special graduate student in agronomy at the University of Connecticut in 1975 and studied classical non-GMO plant breeding and genetics at the University of Kentucky in 1988. He's a certified professional soil scientist, crop scientist, and agronomist with ARCPACS, which stands for American Registry of Certified Professionals in Autonomy, Crops, and Soils, 1979-1990. He's listed in the Who's Who of American Agriculture in 2003. And his greatest qualification, he claims, is that he has raised his own personal home garden, family garden, for 26 of the past 28 years since 1990. Whew.
Exactly.
And now you're involved in a home church, is that right, or something?
That's right, yes.
In Rhode Island,
Uh-huh.
along with how many others?
Individuals?
Yeah, how many
churches?
Well, no, in the home church, do you have
about 30 of us.
about 30?
Yeah.
Okay. And anyway,
We
so
started a home mission in Providence called the Providence Emmaus Three Angels Mission Church, and it's also headquarters for the Rhode Island Great Controversy Project, which mission is to get the book Great Controversy to every Rhode Island home in the next 3 years.
Amen.
We just,
good thing it's a small state.
yes, we just got money now to order the first pallet of books, 54 cases of the It Is Written edition of the Great Controversy. Nice quality printing, good strong binding, and there's 1,296 copies in a pallet. We're going to start. And then we're going to have 3 small evangelistic meetings in the next year, local in Providence area, one in Cranston, one in Warwick. And then I've been working with John Bradshaw and Mark Fox. John Bradshaw is with It Is Written, and Mark Fox with Forever Free Ministries, and having them come a little later on and doing what I call a reaping meetings, a larger scale meeting.
And Fox's first name again is
Mark.
Mark Fox, by the way, has spoken and done a series at the Foxborough Church.
Okay.
Stands to reason.
Yeah.
But Chuck, we're delighted you're here. The format is he's going to have a presentation and then open up for question and answers. Maybe if somebody has a question in the middle of it. He lost all his stuff, well, on the computer, right?
Yeah, last night I wanted something useful that you could take home, because I knew I had too much to cover. So partway through my putting this thing together, I worked quite a few hours pulling information, like maybe 10, 12, 15 hours. I gave more detail at the end, figuring if I didn't get to there was enough detail, it would be self-explanatory. But I went to print it, it was gone, and the backup was gone. Everything I did says April 1st. This is like an April 1st, April Fool's joke.
I should say one more thing, and that is, what I'm particularly happy about with this guy is he's burdened about Seventh Davis education. So, as you know, the Kennedy Brace Foundation is burdened about that too. So, and he's been a consultant for various and sundry things with Cedar Brook School. And we have at least one parent who has a student at Cedar Brook School, the guy sitting in the back. Yeah. So, anyway.
Evangelism and education.
That's right. Okay, all right. Yeah.
This is good.
I'll take one, because I'm a gardener.
Because he's going to record it, so it'd be nice that he could hear you.
Oh, okay, I'll take one. All right.
No,
Will he edit out the groups? I don't want to look at it. All right, thank you very much, Pastor Bill Brace, for inviting me to come here this morning. As I started to sit down and pull stuff together, I realized a couple hours, this is a lot of material to cover in a couple hours. So I'll do as much as I can in the time that I have. Like I said, I lost everything that I put together and typed up in the word processing. And technology reared its ugly head and decided to zap it. And I'll learn next time, partway through, to save it to another computer or some other place. At least I can always go back and recover it. This handout that I have, the back page is spiritual prophecy quotes about gardening. And I thought I'd provide that since it's a spiritual setting. These are quotes from the Book of Education. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just going to highlight them. You can read them more in detail. But the Eden home, it was the Garden of Eden, it was the schoolroom. Nature was the lesson book, and the Creator himself was the instructor. And the parents were the students. This was the model for the first school, and it's still the model today in many respects. Working in the garden is a divine call. Diligent work is required because you just can't expect to go to a piece of land and start planting. It requires preparation. And there's lessons you can learn from the garden, spiritual lessons, they're outlined here. Lessons concerning seed sowing, lessons concerning the nature of seeds and how they reflect the spiritual things. And it's important also as an opportunity for learning, for training for our youth as well. So we should, our youth should be instructed. Parents should take time to teach lessons, spiritual lessons, as well as the practical lessons of gardening. We learn about life through death. As the seed dies, so our Savior died, he was resurrected. The seed can't become a plant unless it, so to speak, dies as a seed and germinates and becomes a plant. There's actually a continuity of life there. Seeds are very interesting things. They can, if they're not properly stored, they can die fairly quickly. They require, for long-term storage, cool temperatures and low humidity. They have found seeds, I should say plural, in the tombs of Egypt. We're talking over 2,000 years old. And some of them have germinated. It's marvelous what God has done to create a little capsule that will go dormant, a suspended life, until the conditions are right. 2,000 years later, moisture and sunlight and warmth have germinates. There was an archaeologist that found some seed. He wasn't sure what they were. He stuck them out in his planter. He had 3 or 4 seeds, and one of them came up with an orange tree, or orange plant. The work of the gardener and cultivation of the soil, the thoughtful gardener will find treasures little dreamed of opening up before him. No one can see in agriculture or gardening without attention to the to the laws involved. We're talking about divine physical laws of life. Special needs of every plant needs to be studied. Different varieties require different soils and cultivation in compliance with the laws governing the conditions for success. Attention is required in transplanting to make sure that each root is protected and well placed in the soil. You can look over that in more detail. The cover on this is a picture from the thing with gardening information is it doesn't go out of date, particularly. Now maybe information about new varieties or varieties that were grown 50 years ago, some have come and gone. Some have stayed and continue to be produced because they're very successful and popular varieties. This back cover will date this. They buy war bonds, save scrap for victory. World War II. This come out during World War II. Victory gardens are a very popular thing. But the reason I wanted to, and the information is very basic and really it hasn't changed how to grow gardens. But the reason I wanted that, I actually bought it was for the cover because it illustrates the tools you need for gardening. From left to right you see an iron rake with 2-inch long prongs, a shovel. In this case, it's a flat shovel. You can even use a curved shovel. He's got a short handle shovel with a handle on top. You can use a long shovel. I prefer a long shovel because I'm tall. My wife likes the short, stubby shovels because she's only 5 foot, an inch or 2 tall. The next tool is a cultivating rake. Could have 3 or 4 prongs. This is important to cultivate the soil next to the plants in a row. It's also useful in stirring in the fertilizer that you apply next to the base of the plants. Some can have 3 or 4 prongs. I have one that's really short, only has 3 prongs, it's very narrow, and I can adjust by bending the prongs to the width I want, so I can work pretty close to the plants and I can even work around them. The first time I grew a garden, because I came from a background on an experiment farm, everything was precisely done. We knew what was put in terms of line of fertilizer. We knew what we were growing. And you want to know, well, what's the response to what you've done? So that's why you're very precise. So the first garden I grew was the same way. And my friend who worked at the Plant Material Center come and visit me. He says, "Chuck, your place looks like the Plant Material Center, like little research plots. Straight arrows, straight as rows straight as an arrow," and so forth. And he was right. And it was a lot of work, a lot of cultivating with the tiller and work. And within a year or two, I realized I'm putting out a lot more hours than I need to. I got down to the point that I just took a lawnmower. I made the rows wide enough I could go down the alleyways with a lawnmower, set it fairly short, and I could keep the weeds under control. I wasn't very close to the plants. I did do some hand weeding and cultivating and get rid of the weeds. But in the alleyways, I just want to keep the weeds down because weeds compete with the plants for moisture and fertility. And if they're too tall, they start to shade your plants. So I try to reduce my workload because I was still working full time and I didn't necessarily want to spend full time in the garden. So other things I like to do too, but I do enjoy working in the garden. Every home should have a good garden with large fruit trees, small fruit and vegetables. I pretty much have been dwelling on vegetables, and I'm going to dwell on the vegetable garden today. A garden can be profitable, it saves money, it helps to feed ourselves. It means more fruit and vegetables. It means a real home where children can love to invite their friends because they have something to share with them. Grow a garden to supply fruit as well as vegetables all season long and provide a surplus for canning, freezing, and drying. So we're not just looking necessarily for fresh fruit and fresh vegetables in the summer. You can produce more and freeze them or can them or dehydrate them. The best vegetables and fruit is that which you pick and eat right away. Within 20 minutes, some of the enzymes break down once they're detached from the plant. But they're still very good. So that's freshly picked is best. The next is fresh fruit or vegetables that have not been cooked in terms of nutritional value, although some are okay to cook. In terms of storage, some things can store in a cool place. It's called a root cellar. I have a section in the house that's concrete walled, and it lends itself real well to storing things. It stays around 50 degrees all year long. It drops down to about 40 in the winter. I have to kind of keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't freeze over the door. So I store potatoes, winter squashes. Winter squashes are your hard squashes that go over the winter, as opposed to summer squashes like zucchini and yellow squash. Other things we store there as well. After the next best quality after that would probably be freezing or drying. I'm not sure, maybe they're neck and neck in terms of preserving the quality of the food. And then canning, which is a process of cooking, well not really cooking, but heating the food to a degree that it kills the bacteria, and it's sealed under a vacuum. And they can stay for a couple of years like that and still be good to eat. You don't want to crowd your garden into a small, tucked-in place or patch near the house with short, stubby rows close together. You want to plant a garden in long, straight rows far enough apart to cultivate it. If you use a field cultivator, then you want to make sure you allow enough room. If your rototiller or tiller is 24 inches wide, you don't want to, obviously you don't want to plant your rows 24 inches apart. They're going to get dug up. You want to allow, and you have to kind of figure for that plant how much space on each side. You might want to allow anywhere from 3 to 6 inches, depending on how straight or how straight you can, once you find out if you wobble, you may have to, on each side of that. So if you have a 24-inch, you might have a 36-inch row. So 2-foot wide tiller, 3-foot row spacing. I vary anywhere from 30 to 36 inches in rows. Some things I'll put 2 feet together if they don't require a lot of cultivating. Okay, let's look at the next page. It's called Essentials of Gardening Success. Rather than me reading all of the first page, I broke it down to 11 points here. Desire and determination. Your initial enthusiasm cannot carry the garden through to successful finish. Careful study, well-laid plans, and plenty of hard work are necessary. You need favorable soil conditions. No amount of planning and hard work, even though that's an important thing, will produce a good garden unless the soil is favorable. One that has a good texture. It's a well-worked soil with neutral to slightly acid pH soil of a suitable texture is ideal. And if someone has a question, chime right in, because I may forget to mention some point. We're going to be going into detail on each one of these categories. Proper seedbed preparation could mean good plowing, or if you don't have a plow, good spading, then harrowing, and then after that raking. And oftentimes I find if it's a new piece of land, I'll rototill it once to break it up, or I'll plow it and rototill it if I get the equipment. I do it all by hand. And the reason I do that is I don't get much exercise. My exercise is mowing the grass with a push mower, shoveling the snow, and working in the garden. Maybe that's not enough, but it's better than none at all. I could just go like this with a rototiller and the snow blower, but my other house that I still have, this driveway is 600 or 800 foot long. I shovel that whole thing by hand, including the circle section in front. It's good exercise. So you don't necessarily have to use a rototiller, although it might be good if it's a new piece of land to break it up, because it can be kind of hard. Wise use of fertilizer. And I'm not an organic gardener, although I use many of the practices of organic gardening. I'm sort of a blend of the two. I try to take the best of both. And I probably use less chemical fertilizer because of that. If available, manure, 10 to 20 pounds per acre. Wow, how does that relate? 40 to 80 pounds per 100 square feet. Will prove very helpful in the garden if it's worked into the soil. And this is done earlier, prior to planting. We're talking about the previous fall or even late winter when the soil becomes warm enough to be workable. Along with the use of complete fertilizers, complete I mean with the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, N, P, and K. And you can get fertilizers that have micronutrients out of ground granite that adds other minerals, which is really useful. That's not usually available around here because that's not a problem. Most all the soils here in New England are derived from granitic-based soils, so you have good micronutrients already, or other nutrients in the soil. Down in the south, it's a problem in the clay soils, and I always use fertilizer with additional, usually ground granite mixed in. And organic gardens even use ground granite. But you want to use a fertilizer according to the recommendations. There's recommendations for the plants you're growing. Like if you're growing a legume, you don't want to use a lot of nitrogen. They don't need it. And in fact, if you provide too much nitrogen, it can make a problem for the plant. If the use of animal manure is objectionable, and it may be because of the animal connection, or you don't want to handle it, you don't like the smell, and it's not the most pleasant thing to work with. Green manure, which is made out of perhaps grass or plants, or compost works just as fine. Question?
What do you think about wood chips?
You want them partially decomposed. I think wood chips are kind of acidic, they become too acidic, so you want to make sure that you, when you mix them in and as they decompose, that you check your pH status. But wood chips do decompose, they add organic matter. After, organic matter is probably one of the most important things in soil because it's what actually holds your nutrients to be available to the plants and releases it. Let me explain a little bit about soil. Plants are growing in soil, but the soil itself really doesn't do much for the plants except to give a substrate in which the roots to grow to hold the plant up. All the action is taking place at the microscopic chemical level in the water. The nutrients are in solution, dissolved in the water. The water is in between the particles of sand and silt and clay, and the roots go down, but there's not just roots, there's fibrous roots or hair roots, and they're quite extensive. That's why when you dig up a plant, you want to get a good bowl of soil with it just if you're going to transplant it, such as maybe you started a seedling, or you want to move something someplace else, maybe something, if you've got a few skips and you want to consolidate your row, you want to get as much of that soil with that root to ensure that you get the fine hair roots as well. Because it's those hair roots that extend down into the soil, going after the moisture that contains the nutrients. Alfalfa has been found to send roots as much as 39 and 40 feet deep into the soil. I was really impressed when I first heard that. The researcher that found that out actually dug a trench and dug down into the soil following the roots. And alfalfa, you may or may not know, is a really excellent source for micronutrients. Suitable kinds and varieties of vegetables. Some vegetables grow well in this part of the country, others grow better in the south or other parts of the country. So you want to grow something like generally you wouldn't expect to grow okra in New Hampshire, although I knew someone that did grow okra in New Hampshire. They started it in the house. Okra is a warm season grass, a warm season plant like corn. So frost is going to be a problem for it. So if you start it from seed, it will grow and germinate the plant after frost, but it will not get mature enough to produce the okra pods you want to eat in New Hampshire, further north. So with this individual, they started him in the house, give him 6 to 8 day a week jump. So when he transplanted them after frost, they were already up and going pretty good, and they took right off, and he did get okra. But generally, it's not an adapted plant for that part of the country because of the growing season that's required. But with some adjustment and modification, you can work around that. Varieties, you have variety names. You don't just have corn, but there's sweet corn, and that's what we're going to focus on. There's other kind of corn. There's flake corn and dead corn, corn used in tortillas, corn used in cornflakes, corn used to make cornbread. All these are different popcorns, all these different kinds of corns. And just focusing on sweet corn, you have white, yellow, and bicolor, white and yellow. But in the late 80s, there was a revolution in sweet corn, and you had this extra sweet, super sweet, and the SH2 varieties. If you had one gene for extra sweetness, it was called extra sweet. Super sweet had two of those genes, or two types of genes to add sweetness, and the SH2 stands for short number 2 gene. And what that does, what happened there is number 2 gene was short. At the end of that gene, there was a genetic information that told the corn, or instructions for the corn, how to convert the sugar into starch. Starch is what's stored in the seed for long-term storage for energy for it to germinate later on. It didn't have that ability. So the corn continued to stay sweet. I picked some corn later on the shelf of a particular variety called Illinois Extra R Sweet. It was the first variety that had that short number 2 gene. Set it on the shelf, and I put some in the refrigerator. 10 days later, I couldn't tell the difference. It held its sweetness right at room temperature. So this is great as far as the marketers were concerned. Some of the disadvantages is the kernels are very tough and chewy. It's still tasty. And the ears, the seed themselves, because they don't have starch, a lot of moisture, they dry up and shrivel up to little tiny seeds. They look sick. When I first saw the seed, I said, these are bad seed. I called the guy. He says, no, that's supposed to what they look like. So I planted them, and they did germinate, and they came out fine. But there's different varieties. Variety names, like you're probably acquainted with Macintosh apples. What a variety, or Empire, or Greeting apples from Rhode Island, different kinds of apples. A variety name tells you the characteristics of the particular plant crop. It's consistent, whether you're in Rhode Island or Maryland. It's going to be essentially the same characteristics in flavor and growth characteristics, the number of days to maturity. I have some seed samples to give away at the end. One is called Roma 2 Green Bean. It's a wide, flat Italian green bean, and it is ready in 58 days. Other green beans may be 70 days. Question?
Is it possible to grow avocados in this climate, or does it have to be more warm, like down south?
I'm suspecting it's going to be a little hard to grow in this climate. I think they would probably have to be further south. But I don't know, to be frank. That's just my opinion. I do have some avocados. We have a greenhouse in our house at the back on the south side off the bedroom. And we do have an avocado, 2 avocado plants in the house, in the greenhouse. But I think they prefer a much warmer climate to do well. If you don't know much about your varieties, you can ask your neighbors who garden or go to a garden shop. And initially, you might want to use what's popular and then experiment as you go along the way. You want to grow for food, not for fancy. We're not trying to grow a fancy garden here. We're trying to be something productive. But you want something that is attractive as far as being able to work and take care of. You want to plant enough for year-round food supply if you want to can, freeze, and dehydrate. Good seed, properly planted. You decide on the varieties you want and obtain the best seed possible. There's seed stores. You can go to AgRange, probably hardware stores. Sometimes tractor supply centers will have seed. I kind of shy away from department store seed. But you can get seed. What's important is on the packet, it tells you it was prepared to be used in a specific year. Seed that are more than 2 years old could have lost their germination, especially if they're not properly cared for. Some of the seed I brought are 20 years old. Like, whoa, how can that be? Because they came from containers that were vacuum sealed, hermetically sealed, as Johnny Carson would say. They're vacuum sealed in a can. And I got them in 1995. That's 20 years. And they're still working fine. I got several cans. But I got it for free. I said, well, I can't turn that down. And I wonder how long they'll keep. But normally you want to save your seed. If you save seed from year to year that you buy, you want to keep it in a cool, dry place. If you have a cool, dry place in the cellar, that's good. Or if you don't have a lot, a little corner in your refrigerator, you can store them in canning jars or plastic bags. The reason for the canning jar or the bag is so that if you have one of these self-defrosting refrigerators, will tend to draw the moisture out of the seed. At the same time, you can have a buildup of moisture in the refrigerator, and it could affect the seed to want to start to germinate. If you add the temperature plus humidity around here should be about 90 to 100. If it's within that range, seed will store for a fairly long time. Of course, some seed will store longer. Legumes store longer than corn. But if you have seed that's more than 2 or 3 years old, you've been saving, you might want to do a germination test, and I'll tell you more about that later. Rather than send it off, you can do your own germination test. You want to get your work done early as far as working and preparing the garden. You want to work the soil, obviously after it's thawed out from being frozen. So you work out a garden. You want to have a plan. You know what you want to grow, about how much you want. Have a plan. You kind of lay it out, draw it out on a piece of paper, and then when you plant the seed, you want to plant them at the proper depth, the proper spacing. And most packets will tell you that information. A very reliable source of information is also seed catalogs. In fact, they can be a wealth of information. I got several seed catalogs that are older, but they'll tell you the characteristics of the variety. They'll tell you the days to maturity. If they have that characteristics of insect or disease resistance, they'll tell you that. Framing the bed. Soil seed contact is important. And you want to, after you plant the seed, you want to kind of tamp the soil with the palm of your hand or lightly with your foot. And that, I'm not talking about like crushing it down so it's so hard the plant can't get its head and top through the soil. Just slightly pack it down so you have the soil is close and around the seed. Because that's where the moisture or the water is held around the seed in the soil. And it will encourage its earlier germination. When the soil has proper moisture, but not too wet. If it's too wet, or if you have a period of cool or cold, wet weather, and you just planted, it's likely the seed will rot. So you have to watch the weather patterns. Check, listen to the weather, use an almanac. These almanacs, to me, are amazing how they can predict the weather a whole year at a time. If you look at a specific day, it may not be right, but they have a cycle. And once you can find the cycle, maybe a few days ahead of what's almanac or a few days behind. Once you're with that cycle, you can use that as a guide as well. You don't want to waste your seed because if you plant it too close, there'll be a lot of competition between what you're growing and your yield won't be good. Like I said, you want to store your seed in a cool, dry place. Controlling disease, you want to do thorough weed control. This means work from the start. This is probably the most time-consuming thing when you add it all up in terms of the hours put into a garden. Until you've eaten your crops, you want to be controlling the weeds so that they're not robbing moisture and nutrients from the plants. And they can be the garden's worst enemy. In terms of controlling insects and diseases, you want to follow instructions to keep down insect damage and reduce the disease troubles as much as possible. You want to be selfish. You don't want to raise garden for bugs. About the only herbicide I've used is 7 dust. And that's on germinating green beans. They get up like this, and the slugs can raise havoc on them. So I had 7 dust. And I put the 7 dust in a stocking, 2 layers of stockings or a sock, and I just shake it and the powder comes out, like that. Well, I had some old 7 dust. I did it, and it worked fine. I found out later that 7 decomposes. The 7 is the name of the chemical, the insecticide that kills the slugs. It decomposes, so it's no good. Well, what am I putting on then? Ground limestone powder. I said, fine. So next time, I went with my bag of lime and put it in my sock the next year and shook it over the plants. It worked fine. I don't need to use that chemical. Now think about it. If you had a bowl of oatmeal and I sprinkled a teaspoon of sand in it, you wouldn't like that. You spit it out, well, that crunchy. I think that's the reaction of some of the bugs and the slugs. So the plant gets big enough that it can outgrow any damage the insect, that kind of insect can do to it. So that outside I've gotten away from even using that chemical. The other chemicals that I use now is what's actually on the surface of the seed. The cucumber seeds are blue, the bean seeds are pink, and the cucumber seeds and squash are sort of a reddish color on the outside, or pinkish. And they contain substances to prevent fungicides from decomposing or rotting the seed. Question?
Yeah, like I have a big garden orchard, but the biggest problem I have is animals eating like the blackberries or the peaches, or animals getting in the garden. So I was wondering what would be the best, easiest way to keep animals from eating the plants, the fruits or vegetables.
What kind of animals are we talking about, you know?
Maybe deer or birds or...
Fencing will be effective for the deer, unless they learn to jump the fence. Then you have to have a double fence. 2 fences, about 4, 5, 6 foot apart. They sense that they can't get over that into the garden. Or if you have a tall fence, maybe 8 foot tall, that will help you keep them out too. That'll take care of the deer. Rabbits, you want to have a tighter mesh on the bottom. And you may even want to dig down into the ground so the fence goes down into the ground, so they try to burrow it and they get resistance from the fence.
What about like to keep the birds from eating a blackberry?
Some kind of netting, cheesecloth or netting that might have a 1/4 inch mesh. That's what's used commercially. Sometimes they elevate the netting over the whole blueberry or raspberry orchard on a commercial basis. For the most part, we get a good amount of rainfall through the year. A garden, we want about 1 inch a week of rainfall during the growing season. But when weather conditions are unfavorably dry, and that does happen, especially in late July, August, and early September, gardens don't grow without water. So if it's possible to apply water, it will really pay off. And by the way, a long soaking is better than a short soaking. Short soaking encourages short root development, or doesn't get deep enough into the soil and it evaporates fairly quickly. A long soaking allows that moisture to get down and fill the soil, void spaces with moisture. Different textures of soil have capacity to hold water, different amounts of water in different ways. A soil that has a good amount of silt or a loamy soil has a higher holding capacity, water holding capacity than a sandy soil. You think about it for a minute. If you've got sand, you pour water in the top, comes right out the bottom. A little bit might be on the surface of the grains of sand, but not much. And if it's very warm, it dries out and it's gone. And where I moved in Warwick from West Warwick, I have extremely sandy soil because I'm right near the coast. And that's a challenge for me. I'm having to add organic matter to try to build up the soil. Not only the moisture holding capacity, something called the tilth, or the crumb structure of the soil as well. Time of year of your harvest. Every vegetable has a period when it has its best quality for use. So you want to harvest them when they're fresh and ready. Seems like the animals sometimes can sense this, and they'll be out the day before you plan to harvest. It's uncanny. I've seen this many times. You want to save as much as possible. That is beyond what for your fresh eating. If you're going to be doing canning, freezing, and drying, or storing for out-of-season use in the home. And don't let any go to waste. You want to share with your friends, your neighbors, your pastor, Pastor Bill, and church members. Or you can sell surplus as a Sabbath School Investment mission offering. My first garden, I had close to 1 acre. I had no concept of how much it was going to produce. I had a tractor because the farm I bought had some fields I wanted to keep open because I wanted some diversity of habitat for wildlife. So I bought a tractor, a plow, and a harrow. And these are old used equipment. I thought, I can get a used tractor. You can bet that in those days I could buy a good used car for $300 to $500. I went 2 decades buying cars for $500, and I drive 100,000 miles, fix it myself. Try to buy a good used tractor, old tractor. No. Tractors aren't out there for looks. They don't go to style. They're out there for practicality. I could pay close to $2,000 for the tractor. But I got old equipment from the 50s. So I was really into the 50s. I used to collect 50s cars. So I got all the old equipment, and I prepared this land. And one end of it would have already been an organic garden for the previous owner. But now I did the whole strip of land, about 600 foot long and about 50 foot wide. And I planted all kinds of stuff. I had 10 varieties of corn, 10 varieties of green. I wanted to see what grew good. 10 varieties of potatoes, corn, many varieties in 20-foot rows. And then I had some I thought would be good. I grew larger areas. I was overwhelmed, not only with the work, but fortunately I wasn't working any other job for that particular year. I had so much. And it was so productive. So we had people come over and pick to take it home. We shared. We put an advertisement on the radio. In Kentucky, where the illiteracy rate was about 40%. That means 40% of people don't read, so they don't have the newspaper to do it. So they advertise on the radio. They had a name for it, I forget what they call it. Anyway, you call in, and it's live. You say, I've got some green beans. You want to come and pick them for free? One lady calls and says, will you pick them for me? Another one called, will you can them for me? I said, lady, they're free. But it was an extreme group. We shared with the neighbor, we shared with church. It was really a joy. It was the first year I grew a garden. And I think why I was so successful because I already knew a lot about growing plants in general. And from there I backed off to about half that space for our own use and still had some good production. Some stories. To the number 11 about divine intervention. We'll get close to there. We're there now. Commit your garden to the Lord. This is a relationship. It's just like a Sabbath School investment project. It's a relationship with God. Tithing is a relationship with God. And you pray to God for your garden. This may seem odd to someone who isn't particularly religious, but why not? We pray for our friends, we pray over sick, people that are sick, various needs, pray to help us to find a good car for a reasonable price. You're cooperating with the divine natural laws. Ask God to intervene in cases of bad weather and pest infestation. Let me tell you these 2 stories real quick. In Kentucky, this one particular day was very dry, and the garden was too far. I learned from your mistakes. The garden was too far from the house to take a hose out there. I guess I could have gone 400 or 500 feet of hose. But normally we get good rain all through the summer. It's not an issue, but not this summer. And my neighbor's garden, which is a mile down the road, she'd drive by, look down the valley, and see our garden. We compare our gardens. And she says, boy, it's been dry, hasn't it? Yeah, she warned us. She knew I didn't water mine. She says, we're not getting rain. But I saw a dark cloud over your place. Did you get rain? I says, yeah, we got a good amount of rain over the garden. God blessed our garden with rain in a very localized area, and I praise God. I've become a real watcher of the weather in ways that I never knew before. Yes, I did work for the agriculture department, but water was available at just a turn of a irrigation knob in the ground. I could have water when I wanted. I could shut it off when I didn't want it. There were some times that I didn't want water because seed was maturing. You don't want the seed to get wet and fall to the ground and then germinate. Another answered prayer, locust. Not locust, look at these. Yes, 17-year locusts, that's what they are. Not like the locusts they have in the Middle East, the different kind of katydid and so forth. There's 7-year cycle, 17-year cycle. This particular brood, they call it brood B or C, was out and about. And it looked like fall after the trees had fallen in places in the county, just stripped of all the leaves. And we prayed for our garden. And we had, I was out in the garden. Here comes one, flying my way. I said, "Don't you dare land." He flew across and went on the other side of the road. Our garden was protected. Other people's gardens were eaten up alive, gone. God provided protection for our garden. God is wonderful, answering prayers. Ask God to teach you spiritual lessons from your garden. There's many spiritual lessons. And some of them are highlighted in the quotes from education here. And give thanks for heaven's bounty. Always be thankful to God for the blessings that He gives you, and in the garden especially. That's sort of an overview or introduction. In a more detailed manner, as time permits, we're going to cover some different topics. I've entitled this Lessons from the Master Gardener. I'm not the master gardener. He's the master gardener. He's also the master mechanic. I can tell you stories about working on cars. A home garden workshop. Practical tips on small home gardens. And we're going to cover some topics. One is a brief history of gardening and farming. Why grow your own garden, where to grow a garden, soil preparation, what to grow, seed selection and buying, direct seeding, garden tools you need, planting your garden and timing, caring for your garden, vegetable types, organic gardening. Oh, thank you. So, we'll begin with a brief history. And that's going to begin with our recent heritage. That's the heritage of our grandparents.
Question.
Yes.
We only have like an hour left, so that's a lot of information that you're going to give us. I have a question about what you think about information you can find on the internet, like YouTube. There's tons and tons of gardening
There probably
advice.
is.
People
I
that
haven't really consulted it. I'm sure there is.
Well, it's unbelievable. And,
Yeah.
and you'll have one group say one thing, someone else say exactly the opposite. How you handle certain crops. Traditional way, and then, oh no, you do it this way, you get the same yield, not as much work. How much weeding you really have to do in your garden. Because I always believe what you said. If you don't pull the weeds, it's going to compete for the nutrients and the water with your plants. But there's other people that say, just keep your cup low. Don't
I
pull close to your plants.
will admit,
So I'm just saying, there's so much information, though you don't know what's.
yeah, I'll admit in terms of when you're talking about, I did compare do intensive cultivating and weeding compared to my mowing technique. And my yields dropped about 20%. I said, but my workload dropped about 80%. And land was not unlimited. I had 200 acres, and I had a whole acre of nice soil for the garden. So I opted to do less work, even though I had slightly lower yields. I wasn't growing.
So a 20% drop in yield is big,
Yeah.
but was that the reason why you had that drop that year? Or were you doing a side-by-side? In other words, you cultivating here and then not doing that intensive weeding?
That's right, yeah. And not only was it here and here, it was checkerboard pattern, because you can have variations in the short distance of the soil. I know from doing experiments that you want to have a randomized layout, and that's what I actually did, to figure, just to come up with that question.
One thing my family and I did was we put wood chips on certain portions of the garden to have walking paths that cut down a lot of the weeding we used to have to do. And the only thing about wood chips, I think it decreases the nitrogen, right? And but we had a lot of yield of tomatoes and green beans, a lot of bean plants. We have a lot in the freezer that we froze for winter.
Question?
Yeah, when you go to number 2 on your essentials for gardening success, it talks about favorable soil conditions.
Yeah.
Is there any way that you could test your own soil without having to put it in a sample jar and mailing it to some place and getting the information back? How do you do it?
Yeah, I've tried to do that, and what I do is I get a sample of the soil, and you don't want to get it in the first inch or two because you get organic matter, and you want to get it below that. So it's mostly all particulate matter in soil. And I don't mean organic, I mean roots, you don't want roots and stuff like that. And I get maybe a quarter of a teaspoon or half a teaspoon, and I'll put it in a small bowl, and then tilt it, and I'll add a certain chemical from the pool testing kit, add it to it, then I'll extract some of that water into an eyedropper or fluid, compare it to the color chart on the pool and tell me the pH. But I could be off as much as 0.5, which is a fairly significant amount. I mostly wanted to make sure I didn't have 5.0, which is fairly acid. I just was doing a range. It was quick and dirty. But a soil test is useful. Even if you get one soil test for your garden area, you can get samples from throughout your garden area, get an average. And what's important is you want to know what your pH is, so you can pull your pH higher. pH level and organic matter are two most important critical things to ensure that you have a place for nutrients to be stored for your plants. Now your soil test will, if you tell them what you're growing, you can tell specific crops, or you can say just a general home garden. Like if you're a commercial producer now, I'm going to grow corn on this field, and you've got your samples taken from the field. The universities you deal with will provide you fertility recommendations for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But if it's just a garden, you keep your cost on. Well, sometimes the soil tests are free. They might charge a nominal. I don't know what they do in Massachusetts, but they will give you information that will be helpful. Maybe they'll say, well, if you're going to grow this, you need this. If you're going to grow this in the garden, you need this. That's a guide for your fertility.
What about what would be the best compost, or what do you think of fireplace ashes to put on the garden? Would that be good to
Your
boost
fire,
nutrients?
actually the word potash, I think somehow connects with the ashes from a fire, potassium or potash. And that is a source of nutrients for a garden, especially potassium. You did mention the wood chips. As they decompose, they do use quite a bit of nitrogen in the decomposition process. So that's something you have to watch. Okay, in terms of our grandparents, some of them came here from the mother country. And farming and gardening was a big thing. It was part of life. They come here and raise gardens. Some of our grandparents who were involved in World War II, and picture gardens were a very patriotic thing to have, because it means less land was devoted for production for agriculture, could be used to raise other commodities related to the war effort. As far as the history, besides we got our own heritage, we get our American experience. Native Americans or Indians. When the Europeans came here, there was already squash, there was already green beans, there was already corn. Now granted, the corn was only this big, maybe this big. 95% of the work from a breeding standpoint had already been done with corn. The rest of it that's happened since is mostly made larger ears, introduced new varieties, or maybe disease or insect resistance. Originally, corn that they've determined was derived from a plant that had an ear with 8 kernels in a row. It's called teosinte, and that's actually used for breeding source, for genetic source of traits to be brought into corn. And each grain was encapsulated with a husk. They grew it, and they ground it, and they used it. Well, one variety didn't have husks. The whole thing was with a husk. Well, that's cool. That was a lot easier to work with. Another variety developed a double row, and they saved the seed. We're not talking about a 5 or 10 or 15 year period. We're talking about hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 of years, that the Native Americans worked with these. This is just through natural selection, not through human selection on the crop. The crop has been modified through human selection. We're not talking about necessarily breeding, although we can't underestimate the knowledge that the Aztec Indians or even other ancient cultures had in understanding and working with a variety of things from a technical standpoint. Corn, but they had corn, it's already here. You see the word corn in the Bible, by the way, and I had a dispute with my professor when I first went to URI. Yeah, they had corn in the old world. It's right in the Bible. It says, no, that means grain. I had to look up the word. The word's kern morphed into corn in New English. Old English was kern. Kern means, short for kernel, means grain. So I learned something there. But corn was a new world crop. Besides that, you had beans, different kinds of beans. That was developed by the Native Americans. And then squashes. You probably heard the reference to the three sisters, the three main crops that Native Americans grow in New England: corn, beans, and squash. They planted hills of corn, 4, 5, 6, 7 plants in a hill, come up with stalks. They interplanted or co-planted the green beans. The corn come up fast, and the corn acted as a pole for the green beans to grow up. And they were on the outside, so they got the sunlight, but they didn't provide a lot of shade to the corn. The corn was up here by that time. And then in the ground in between, they planted squash. Squash has large leaves. It shades the soil, so it doesn't get so hot, so there's not as much moisture loss. Really an ingenious combination of plants. And it was low maintenance. They didn't have to go and do much weeding because the squash covered a lot of the ground and shaded out the weed seed that would try to germinate. They plant it, maybe check it out one time and leave and come back and harvest it and tend to it. But that was the Native American experience. Now, in colonial America from, say, 1620 to 1800, everybody was a farmer. Well, how can I say everybody? What about presidents? Thomas Jefferson was a farmer. In fact, he did a lot of experimental farming on his property. George Washington, when he retired, he wanted to go back to his farm. People found a lot of joy and pleasure in raising their own produce and farming and gardening. Then the industrialized America from 1800 to 1900. Farming was still very important for everybody, but maybe not as many. Maybe only 80 or 90% were involved in gardening and farming, but still a large percentage. And then you had the period of mechanization of agriculture, or machinery. First, in the late 1800s, it was with steam-powered tractors. But then later on, gasoline and diesel and different other types of fuel were used to propel tractors. So we're looking at basically really the revolution at that point from mechanization from 1900 to 1950. By that time, you're looking at 40 or 50% of the population in our country was still involved in agriculture and farming. And then you had the modern agribusiness. This is where corporations decided they could come in and make some money and force out the small guys and take over the land and do an economy of scale production. By that time, you're looking at 10% of the population were involved in farming. From 1960 to today. Now, recently, it's probably about 2 to 4%. 2 to 4 people out of 100 are involved in farming and even in distribution of food. I'm not talking about people that work in the grocery store, but I mean the moving it around by trucks. So you've seen a big change in the number of people that have been involved in this country in farming and gardening, or at least commercial farming. So it's important if you want to have your own source of food in case there's some issue or disaster to have something to fall back on. Which brings me to the question as to why grow your own garden. But before I get there, I want to mention some disasters. 5 disasters. The first one is the potato blight in Ireland. No, it's not here, it's in Ireland, but it involves here eventually. My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, Sir Walter Raleigh, introduced the potato into Ireland in 1585. You've heard the word Irish potato? It came from America. Actually, it originated in Peru. The Peruvians grew potatoes, and They made dehydrated potatoes. What? They would take the potato and stomp on it with their foot, and at night it would freeze, and the moisture would be drawn from it, and then they would gather it the next day or next morning and store it. They made, or next period of time, I don't know how long that was, but they actually made dehydrated potatoes. That's how they store the potatoes. But we're talking about a crop that's been around for 2,000 years in the old world, or the new world, this part of the world. So the potatoes brought over Ireland. There was a famine in Ireland, and Sir Walter Raleigh was hailed as a hero. He was even a governor of Rhode Island for a while. That was in 1585. Potato blight, this is a disease that destroys the potatoes in the ground, and starts in the plant, and it destroys potatoes. And because of that, now we have more famine. Massive immigration to the United States of Irish people. Because of one of my relatives who brought potatoes to Ireland. It's interesting how things have connections. Anyway, they came to the United States, and okay, the second disaster was the Dust Bowl era of the 1920s. You had the introduction of mechanized agriculture. Well, it was more convenient to have large, expansive fields. Woodlands were cut down, or if there was no woodland, the prairie was plowed and planted to crops. Extensive areas. Winds are not unusual in the Midwest. In fact, I was in Texas for a week. It never stopped blowing. I said, how do they keep their hats on? But they're tight. They're very tight. I found that out to keep them on. But it seemed like it was always blowing when I was there. Well, the soil got dry, and it was a dry spell in 1922, that summer, and it started blowing the soil around. It blew off the topsoil. Some places it accumulated to be 2 and 3, 4 foot next to the houses. It blew from the Midwest all the way to Washington, D.C. Because of that, the father of modern soil conservation, Hugh Hammond Bennett, he was in Congress campaigning for a bill, promoting a bill to start an agency that would help farmers to reduce soil erosion on their farms, and because of this wind erosion especially. And as he was promoting his bill in Congress, it started getting dark. People looking up and says, that's the soil from Kansas blowing over here. He got a good support for his program. My grandfather, which I didn't know until years later, he actually worked for the Soil Erosion Service, is what it was called at first in 1933, before it came to Soil Conservation Service. Another disaster, but as a result of that agency, a lot of the farmland was they put in windrows, rows of trees, a sequence of different kinds of species that would block the wind and slow it down from from blowing the soil. Total loss of all corn seed produced in the United States in 1983. No one, I didn't know about it. This is really a hush secret. I mean, those that are close to the situation knew about it, but I was surprised. All seed were wiped out because of a disease. It was vulnerable. All the seed stock that we used, all the plants that we used to grow seed for seed stock, were the base genetic material was from one strain. And this particular disease wiped all the plants out across the country that year. Fortunately, there was seed production going on in South America, and the disease was not there. And from that they learned a lesson and changed their genetic stock. Question?
Where do you think would be the best place to get like the healthiest seeds, fruits, vegetables?
Where to get seed? Seed stores. I don't know if there's many seed stores like there are in the south around here. Agway would be a source. You can buy some through catalogs. There's a number of catalogs, seed catalogs.
You said you didn't like department stores, but what about Home Depot or
Walmart.
Well, Walmart's a department store, so I'm gonna stay
Yeah,
away from it.
I usually tend to shy away from them, because I'm thinking that the seed may not be the best quality in terms of germination. But I have bought seed from there and used it successfully, so it's just, I don't really have a basis for shying away from the department store. Question?
So I guess, is there a company that makes seeds that are not modified at all? Is there a certain company that doesn't make any type of feed that has been altered?
There's some companies that sell heirloom varieties, which means they haven't been managed, I mean, don't have genetic engineering behind them. They're older varieties, and they're open pollinated. You can actually save the seed. The problem with many seed today, from a gardening standpoint, from thrift, is that they're hybrids. Well, hybrids allows you to get characteristics you want that are consistent that generation. But the seed from that crop planted the next year are like a lot of variety. There's a lot of variation, and you're not getting consistent characteristics of performance. So some people prefer heirloom seed because they're self-pollinated or open-pollinated, and then hybrids have a dominant and recessive set of genes that are crossed, and maybe they've been inbred for 8 generations, a double cross, whereas the other ones have been self-pollinated for so long that they have a stable genetic base that allows them to be seed to be used in following generations.
So open pollinated means basically you can plant it 1 year, it grows up into a fruit, you take the seed, you plant it the next year, it'll produce.
Okay, open pollinated means that it can be pollinated by bees. That is, it pollinates with other plants of the same kind. Self-pollinated, I learned this with squash. 1 year, where's the bees? There's been an issue with bees. And particularly squash. Those plants, flowers have to get pollinated. And the bees, they're your friends. They do a lot of work, they help. Well, the bee population has gone way down. You can get what's called self-pollinated plants, where the pollen pollinates itself. Now, why can't the open pollinated do it? Because they have a genetic trait that prevents what we would call inbreeding or self-breeding. The gene, when the pollen lays at the end of the stamen, it puts out sort of like a root that goes down into the inside of the stamen, into the ovary, and the genetic material joins with the seed inside, makes the seed inside. But when a plant that will not self-pollinate, it rejects that pollen, or I wouldn't say physically rejects it. It just doesn't accept the genetic material. It's like it's got an autoimmune disease almost to its own pollen. Question?
One thing I found is with some fruits or vegetables, they come up every year. For example, my family and I moved in a number of years ago, and we noticed that every spring chives come up. We don't plant them, we don't water them, we don't do anything. We get a lot of chives.
Some things reseed. I think chives probably come back from bulbs under the ground. Yeah, that's they're coming back from. And something like that you want to have off to the side of the garden, so you're not stirring up and cultivating it every year.
Are there some types of fruits or vegetables that would be able to plant that will come up every year that are not too much maintenance?
Let's see, rhubarb is one that comes to mind.
Strawberries?
Yeah, strawberries. Thinking of vegetables. Yeah. Okay, perennial vegetables. Okay, chives, multiplying onions, sage, mint, thyme, some of your herbs, yeah. Some of your, what's called perennials, basically. Perennial means it grows year after year. Annual means it grows for 1 year. Biennial might grow for 2 years, then that's it.
Have you heard of purslane?
I've heard of it, I've not grown it though.
Yeah, I have it growing wild in my yard, and I didn't realize what it was until I went to Whole Foods one day and I saw some for sale. I'm like, what? I said, this stuff grows wild in my yard.
It's a green leafy, yeah.
So I'm tempted to almost try to find somebody who would want to buy it because it just grows, enormous. The more you cut it, the stronger it grows.
There's another one called Crease, C-R-E-E-S.
It's got like a red stem, but green fatty.
From 1960 on, you had higher, after World War II, you had higher use of herbicides, and that caused another problem, or another disaster, in terms of the impact on the environment. Pesticides getting into our food systems, pesticides getting into mothers who are breastfeeding, pesticides getting into birds, affecting the thickness of the shells. And classic book written in 1960 was Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. The beginning of the environmental movement, modern environmental movement in 1970, beginning with Earth Day. So there's a lot of things that are happening that have impacts. By having a garden and being conservative, we can reduce those impacts. Because we're producing our own crops instead of being dependent on large agribusiness farms. Why grow a garden? Nutrient production is important. I mean, not nutrient production, nutrient quality. Quality. You have fresh produce, non-GMO, little or no herbicides. Oh, I was mentioning the herbicides on the fungicides on the seed. That's the only type of pesticide that I use. And after repeated failures, especially planting green beans, and having them rotting in the soil because I'm not always, the weather doesn't always cooperate, I found that if I used treated seed and a fungicide, they came up very good. And we're not applying this thing to the whole garden. It's in one localized area. And so I thought, well, that's a conservative use of a pesticide. It's on the seed coats. So that's really the only thing. So I can't call what I do organic, but I try to go as far as I can that way.
Can I ask you a question? How much produce do you buy from the store? Do you self-test? Do you buy nothing?
I've been buying quite a bit now because I just moved to new property, and I'm dealing with the really sandy soil.
Right.
Yeah, I'd say about half or more of my produce I buy from the
How
store.
careful do you shop what you buy? Do you worry that what you're buying is...
Gonna kill you?
No, not kill you, but it's gonna shorten your life.
No, I don't really worry about it. I think the worrying will have an effect on me too.
I don't even worry, you think about it.
Yeah.
Think about what.
My wife does most of the buying, and she's been buying more organic things, and she shies away from GMO too. Question?
Just an observation, like when my family and I grow tomatoes from the garden, you can really taste the difference in the nutrition. Like the tomatoes from the garden would be up here, and then the organic tomatoes from the store would be like in the middle, and then tomatoes that are not organic would lack all that nutrition.
You're talking about the cardboard tasting hot house tomatoes.
Yeah.
Crunchy one.
Yeah. Taste is an important factor in wanting to grow your own garden, definitely. Question again?
Are you going to be talking about people that want to plant in pots?
Container planting.
Yeah.
That's a section that deals with what I call urban gardening. You're in a very restricted area in terms of size. Maybe you have a little plot of land. Maybe you don't have any land. Maybe you're renting, and the landlord doesn't want you to have a garden, or there is no garden. It's all pavement or trees, shrubs, I'm saying. So if you have a porch or a deck, you can grow things out there in pots very well. Grow tomatoes or green beans. You can even grow some things inside, but they tend, if you're not careful, they tend to get kind of lanky and grow. They really need the sunlight.
Do you change the soil every year, or do you get new soil for the containers? Or?
For the containers?
Yeah, we can reuse whatever you have.
My wife tends to use it maybe for 2 or 3 years, and then she'll renew it. She does most of the container gardening. We have a little greenhouse just off one of the rooms in the house. But I think if you continue to use the soil over, you may get an accumulation of pathogens. And that leads me to something else. How important it is to rotate what you have. You have a class of plants which are called the nightshades. or solanaceae. That includes tobacco. I don't grow tobacco, but there was tobacco grown on my land, so I had to be aware of it, because it includes tobacco, eggplant, okra, tomatoes, potatoes, and there's a couple others. I didn't realize how many flag-shaped plants, plants in the Solanaceae family that we were eating. And tobacco, soil harbors viruses, plant viruses, that are susceptible to all the plants I just named. So I had to stay away from that. I couldn't grow those things in that soil. But in the garden area that was already a garden in Kentucky where we live in, we would rotate. I would usually start out with, in a new piece of land, potatoes. This would add a lot of organic matter besides what I added to the soil. I would follow that with a legume, peas, or green beans to build up the nitrogen. I could add chemical nitrogen, but the plants will do it for you too. They may add as much as half the nitrogen you need for the next year or next crop, which would be a nitrogen-loving, nitrogen-needing plant such as corn or squash. And so you don't have the same thing in the same place all the time. You'll start to deplete the soil. So you move it around. Now, granted, the tall crops, you kind of want to you want to the north side of the garden so they don't shade the shorter plants. Besides rotating, I also advocate, and it's a biblical basis, resting in the garden every 7th year. Well, do I just quit gardening on the 7th year? That's a lot of produce to have to put up and save for 2 years. Some things we have been able to save, like fruit, pears, canned those, and they do last 2 years. But I have an area that I rotate. It's not grown that year. It's called fallow, or I just kind of keep it low for the weeds. But nothing's grown there for that year. So it allows for the decomposition that takes place of what's in the soil to build up the soil. The granitic material is broken down by the microbes in the soil to utilize the nutrients and makes it available for plant production. But if you're growing the plants there every year, you soon catch up to the ability of those microbes to make the nutrients available out of the soil particles. So you give it a rest, it builds up the soil. Other ways of building the soil, of course, is adding mulch, compost, or manure if you want to use it as well.
I know you live near the coast. What do you think about the seaweed or seagrasses or even ocean? I know guys that use seawater. They go get gallons of seawater, they dilute it, they mix it, and then they use it in there to supplement their soil.
I've not tried that yet. That's an interesting concept because seawater would contain a lot of minerals. My concern is the effect of the salt on the plant. And something like tomatoes and corn would be extremely sensitive to salt, although there may be varieties that have been developed.
Yeah, they dilute it. I forget what they, like 1 gallon for 30 gallons.
Yeah.
And
But
then
they don't pour it on the plant, you pour it on
No,
the
they
soil.
pour it. They usually do it in the
Yeah.
early spring or late fall.
Yeah. I remember old timers, from what I've read, would trench the soil and they would bring seaweed in and cover it over.
Yeah, a lot of guys do that too.
Yeah.
They let the seaweed sit up the whole winter on top of their beds, and then they take the seaweed away, and then they'll mulch that with like grass cuttings or something, and use it later, but then that's how they supplement their soil.
Yeah. I don't do it, but I've been thinking about it because I'm near the ocean and stuff is available. I'm not totally using seawater though at all. I haven't thought of that.
Have you done hydroponic farming, and if not, what are your thoughts on hydroponic?
Not hydroponic farming. I have grown plants hydroponically in a lab because I was working with a graduate student. These are grasses, but the principles are the same. In fact, I had a pot of squash and tomatoes in there too, just for the fun of it. And I would mix up what's called the Hoagland solution, which contains 16 or 17 of the essential macro, large quantity nutrients and micronutrients that are needed for plant growth. And they would do well. They had good flavor too. The pot, we use pots, we circulated the nutrient solution through the pot, We aerated the water, and we had little things that held the plant in place to give stability to the plant. But the roots just hung down in the water. My brother-in-law and I are thinking of going, he's actually built a greenhouse in Connecticut. We're thinking of doing a hydroponic operation there. Not only with plants, but with aquaculture, feeding the fish, the nutrient waste products are recycled to the plants. And of course the nutrients are high in nitrogen. And you don't want too much nitrogen in the fish because will kill the fish. But the plants will suck it up and use it for production. Question?
Yeah, I was wondering about back to the seaweed. I know that's successfully used in the Caribbean. They put the seaweed, but they drench it a lot, like they wash out a lot of the excess salt, I guess, and then they mulch it into the bed. But I also wanted to ask about the concept of resting the land every 7th year. For people like us who live in New England, where you only get to farm for a small percentage of the year, relatively speaking, do you still need to rest that land every 7th year, or could it be spread out a little bit more? You understand what I'm saying? Because you're only farming for maybe 4 months of the year, really, in New England, before the snow comes again. So do you need
Yeah, but it's during
year?
that 4 or 5 months that the nutrients are being drawn out of the soil into the plants. Then you're harvesting the plants, so those nutrients are now gone. And it's a way of replenishing the nutrients by giving it a rest. And I chose 7 years because that was the biblical model that was given. And I'm not doing it for a religious reason. It's just God provided that instruction. And God made these things, and there's a lot of wisdom that He has.
I've got a question with regards to like earthworms. Like our garden, there was a lot of earthworms.
Earthworms are your friends. They do a lot of good. In the course of a year, there's a good amount of earthworms, and you can assure a good amount of earthworms by liming the soil so they have a favorable pH. And for the most part, you want a pH between at least 6.5, 6.8 is even better, but not over 7. Slightly acid, we're talking like 6.6 to 6.8. And the earthworms will flourish in that kind of situation, especially if there's organic matter being introduced in the soil. They eat the organic matter, they ingest the soil particles, pass through them, they burrow holes in the ground, in the soil, it aerates the soil. In the course of a year, earthworms in an acre can turn over a ton of soil. Now granted, a ton of soil, how much is that? That's about 1/4 of an inch spread out over a whole acre. That's a ton of soil. A ton of soil might be a cubic yard, 3 by 3 by 3. They're really helpful. They're your friends. Yes. Let's skip some of the details on why there's I think some things are very obvious. Where to grow a garden. Sunlight is really important in partial shade. Some cases you want to have an area that's partially shaded because some plants can't tolerate a lot of sun for a long time. Other plants, like for example corn, will need and do well with lots of sunlight. You want a decent soil. When I say decent, I mean I don't have decent soil where I am. That was the trade-off when I bought that property. We had other things that were desirable about it. The trade-off is very sandy soil, so we can build it up. Or we may go in one area we're going to actually have a raised bed and build up and make our own soil for that area. The exposure, or another aspect of these soils, is the soil texture. Texture is the coarseness and fineness of the soil. Now you've got sand, silt is finer, clay. We don't have clays around it. We have clay in the soil. We're only talking 2 or 3%, but they provide an important function for holding nutrients. If it was clay, you could take the soil and squeeze it like this, you'd have a ribbon of soil like that. That doesn't happen around here, maybe in some remote spot or something. Most soils are going to be sandy, they're going to be silt loams or silty clay loams, but they're except for the sands, most soils are going to be useful for gardening. But you know, obviously don't want a wet soil, one that is wet, especially in the winter, if it's wet and standing with moisture, it's going to be even too wet in the summer. You want a location of a garden that's close to watering. You want to know the past history of the land, and like what was grown before. In my case, in Kentucky, tobacco, I wanted to know where the tobacco was grown, so I had to look at aerial photographs. And that imagery is available now on the internet a lot more easily. And I also looked at records of what they had for the farm. Another aspect is its history is on the research farm, I was using herbicides to control the broadleaf weeds in this particular crop where we were growing seed of a grass called purple stem. And we were finished using that field, we plowed it up, and I wanted to grow clover. And I waited 2 years. So I knew that prior herbicide use would be a problem for that first year. I thought it would break down. I planted the clover, and these are individual sprigs. We had a tablespoon of seed, and I had to plant 3 acres. You're talking maybe several thousand seed. The plants are planted 3 foot apart. So that's 490 plants per acre. And we started them in little containers, and we put 2 seeds in each one, because the germination was low. And that's something, if you know your seed germination is low, say 50%, you want to double your planting rate. And if you 2 come up and nothing here, you move 1 over. So that's what we did, the containers, and some come up, some didn't. We got our plants, we set them out with a tobacco planter modified with a strawberry extension. We had 2 fields that did well. This field came up, but then had an area that was dying. We couldn't figure out why. And my assistant said, we need to get a soil test for herbicide content. Come back, it was high in 2,4-D, which is a broadleaf herbicide, and that's what was killing the clover. If I had tested it before I planted it, it would help me a lot to know not to do that. So past history is important.
So how would you eliminate over herbicide use? How can you?
In a small area, you could use use activated charcoal. That will absorb the herbicide.
With the potash too, like all the stuff from your wood
I
stove?
don't know. In fact, they use what they call carbon banding when they plant some crops. They have a band of powdered carbon that goes on top. They plant the seed, and then they put the herbicide right afterwards. Where the carbon is, it absorbs the herbicide and doesn't get in the ground before the seed are planted. Otherwise, the seed would die before it germinated, or would prevent it from germinating. You want also fairly level land or terrace land. In your rows, you want to go across the slope. That is so that you roll. If you have sloping land, you want to say the land is sloping this way. You want your rows to go parallel to each other across. If you do it the other way, and it rains heavy, you're going to get a lot of washing, soil erosion, and some plants, especially the little ones, will be uprooted and won't do well. What to grow? It's really what you like. In the first year, I would recommend what's easy. You could grow, start with a few simple crops like corn, green beans, squash, cucumbers, even potatoes. Then also, what do you want to freeze and put up determines what you grow and how much of it. You want to grow what's adaptable to the area. What type of garden do you want? Do you want just summer crops? And that's pretty much what I grow, yes.
Potatoes you grow in the ground, right? You like dig a hole and plant them?
Yes, that's right. You either dig a hole or a trench, and you plant. You want about 2 ounces of potato. You take a potato and quarter it, if it's about this big. And you want to make sure there's a couple eyes, the little sprouts that are getting ready to start. When you plant on each piece, and you plant them about a foot apart, 10 inches to a foot apart. And they require a fairly high level amount of nitrogen. I've tended to be conservative and have cut my use because of it, not knowing that I've increased nitrogen and see the benefit of it. But potato, they call it seed potato, but not really seed. Potatoes are produced vegetatively. You're taking a potato, planting it, the sprout grows and it puts down roots. It's still the same plant as what it was before. It hasn't changed. There's been no crop. There's been no genetic crossing taking place because of pollination. Potatoes do produce flowers. I don't know if they produce seed or not. Now you do get, once in a while you'll see a variation in a field of potatoes. It's called a sport, S-P-O-R-T. And that's because of some change in the gene or a mutation. And the variety of potato I like was actually Red Nolan was developed by the University of North Dakota. It's cold tolerant. You can plant it early. It comes up early and gets you production early. And it has a nice deep green color. What's it called again? Nolan, N-O-R-L-A-N-D. It's a red potato. And its flesh is, when you bake it, the baked potato, almost like mashed potato inside. It's a very fine textured potato. My wife told me about it. She said, when we were in Prince Edward Island, we used to get Prince Edward Island Reds in the 60s. And she was raving the whole time about them, and even her other family members. So I call around, well, what's a Prince Edward Island Red? This is when I did my garden the first year in 1990, 1991. And I finally ended up talking to a potato broker in Texas. He buys and sells potatoes. Okay, stockbroker, potato broker, whatever. So he said, oh, that's a type. Like you have Idaho potatoes and russets and chipped potatoes and fried potatoes. That's a type of potato that was grown in Prince Edward Island area. And he said it could be any one of the 3 varieties. So he didn't have it, but I contacted, finally found some, and they sent me samples. Like a 2-pound bag. I didn't want to get 100 pounds and plant it if it wasn't the right one. So we planted a couple of experiment rows, and we tried them. That's the one. She said, that's the one. It was Red Nolan, developed at the University of North Dakota. They had a sport, apparently, in one of their fields. It's called dark Red Nolan. It's much darker red color. That's the only difference that I know. There may be some other differences as well. You want to plant and arrange your garden, and I've mentioned some of these things already, your permanent crops. Their location should be off to the side. It could be rhubarb or chives or other things that I mentioned earlier. So they're not in the middle of the garden and just disrupt things. In this case, you're not rotating those. Crop succession, in one spot you could have an early crop. It comes to maturity, you produce it, you can then plant another crop after it. I was mentioning types of gardens. There's summer crops only. You can have a late spring, you could have a late spring, a late fall, a late summer or fall. I'm trying to say cool season crops, late summer and fall. Or some of your cool season crops can be planted very early. As early as like 6 weeks before frost. Which reminds me, frost is a major thing in affecting what you grow in your growing season and the time of planting. In this area, and I say Norwood in particular, there'll be variation due to elevation. Higher elevations, the frost will occur later in the spring or early in the fall. Or in the valleys, you'll have frost. Because of cold air drainage, you'll have frost a little earlier in the valley, or a little later in the spring and a little earlier in the fall. The average frost dates are May 10th, last frost, average, that's an average, and October 20th. May 10th, October 20th. That is what's called your growing season, or frost-free growing season, because you can grow things before and after that too, especially if they tolerate the cold. That's your frost-free growing period. And I say that's an average time. Now, you can have a frost that's, and we had one a few years back in Kentucky, another one in Rhode Island, on the 17th of May. That's late, to me, that's a late frost. Now, how do you know when that's gonna happen? Well, you can generally observe the weather patterns. You get a cold and a warm and a cold and then it stops, and you're okay. Sometimes you can plant early if you watch the weather patterns and take advantage of there not being frost as late in the spring. In the fall, you get frost. Some things you can protect from the frost. We put out sheets over the tomatoes or sheets over a section of cucumbers to protect them from the frost. And sometimes your first frost in the fall, you may not get another killing frost or serious frost until a week or 2 weeks later. And the weather's still nice in the daytime. Nice, warms up nice, so you get more production. Plant height and shading is important as to where you place your plants. Crop rotation I mentioned. Rest in the land I mentioned. Okay, let's talk about seed. We're going to touch things about seed. Reputable seed sources. You've got seed catalogs are sources of seed. They can sometimes be more pricey if you get small quantities. Like you can get little packets like this. Well, not that little in size, but content-wise, that they can be $2 or $3. Sometimes they're on sale at the end of the year, and I don't mind getting them at the end of the year and using them next year, especially when I can put them in a canning jar and save them. It keeps the germination good. But green beans seed keep well. I know that already from my background of working with seed. I bought, this is a 5-pound bag. I bought this bag in, where's the date on that thought? I've had it several years anyway. Oh, 2010. It's 8 years. I still got half of it in a jar that I use. In fact, that's like the seed here. If you're careful and take care of your seed, you can keep them a long time. But this bag was like $12. Here's the price, $12. My Agway that I was going to Rhode Island wanted $22. I found an Agway over near my brother-in-law's house in Connecticut, in Plainville. It was almost half the price. So I'm starting to deal with them and getting stuff. But that's the source of seed, and Agway, your dealers, Tractor Farm Supply, and maybe they even use the same seed that ended up in department stores. But if you can find a seed store or get a hold of seed catalogs, and like I said, the seed catalogs have a wealth of information about the individual crops and varieties. And they tell you also there's even information about planting dates. These small packets will have they'll have a little map on it, colored map, and have recommended planting dates. Watch those pretty close because they're a good guide. You want fresh seed of a recent crop year. I'm talking like seed that we would use this year would have been produced last year. Seed from the year before, that's okay, and maybe even the third year before. But we don't know how well these places store their seed. But you can keep them longer if you know you have control over the situation, and I've done that. You can do your own germination. Say you've got a batch of seed and you're not sure about it. You can take 50 seed, put a couple layers of paper towel on a plate, moisten it with water until it's soggy, put the seed on, cover it with saran wrap, and check it to make sure it stays moist. In about 5 days, take a seed count, 10 days, and if it's germinated of some size of the root, you can put that into you can plant that inside to get a seedling that you can set out later on. So you keep track of how many are germinating. At the end of, say, 15 or 20 days, out of 50 seed, if you've got 30 seed have sprouted, that's 60% germination. Well, that's not desirable if you're going to sell them. People don't want to buy 60, it means almost half the seed is no good. So you double your seeding rate to make up the difference. But you can keep seed that way. Hybrid seed varieties, because they are crosses of they're heterozygous seed. What that means is they have, for a particular trait, they have a dominant and recessive gene. The dominant gene is what's expressed. but when they cross, you get a mixture. Some of them have the dominant gene, and some don't. They have both recessive, so you're getting and then you've got a lot of genes involved, so you're getting, they don't come, what I'm saying is, seed from second generation hybrid do not come true. If you don't mind that, no, that's okay. But if you want a consistent variety characteristics, you either use hybrid seed or you use heirloom varieties that have had generations of mixed breeding, and that stabilizes the gene base in that particular crop. Heirloom seed, I mentioned just briefly. There's a variety of choices and characteristics you want to look at. Disease resistance is important. If you have a strain that has disease resistance that's mentioned, and that's a problem in your area, and if not sure, you can ask. I would almost prefer that one. I mentioned treated versus untreated seed. To me, it's been important for seed, corn, even corn. Crows will eat your corn.
Now,
Treated seed, they don't.
do you treat your own seeds by yourself?
No, they're treated when I buy them. Yeah, most of the time. And by the way, there isn't much of a disclaimer on here, but you can see the inside of this bag. It's kind of pink inside. You don't want to eat the seed. You don't want to get, well, the animals seem to have enough sense. You don't want to get it in reach of little kids. They're like 3 or 4 years old. They could have just, and they don't kill them. It might make them sick. You don't want that.
Do heirlooms lack in their ability to fight disease?
Not necessarily, no.
What was the question?
The ability of heirloom plants from heirloom seeds to fight disease and be hard, as opposed to something that's bred for fighting.
Yes, some heirlooms have good disease and insect-resistant characteristics. And you'll have to find a write-up for that particular variety of heirloom seed. And, you know, it would tell you that. At least I would think they would promote that fact if they were trying to sell it. I've not used heirloom seed too much, although I'm going to think about it more because savings, I've kept seed a long time, there's been vacuum packed, but it may be difficult to get seed in the future, especially when you can't buy and sell or something like that. And you want to have a available seed supply.
I have a question. I've been looking at the heirloom companies, heirloom seeds. They have offerings like Bugs Be Gone Garden, where you can plant certain varieties to keep bugs out of your garden. How successful do you know them to be, if you do know?
I actually don't know. I've heard Virgos are pretty effective. Yeah. And the odd thing is 90% of the bugs that are out there don't bother your plants. It's the few that do. And when they find them, they just proliferate. They start growing like crazy, so that they multiply and take it over. And that's one reason you want to rotate, is they may be harbored in an area of your garden. You move over here, it's not there for that year. The plant they needed isn't there, and they die out, so the population is less. But yeah, I would consider some of those things. It's certainly something to try to avoid having to use insecticides. And I myself actually don't use insecticides in the garden.
Have you had any experience with like companion planting, or what plants can grow with other plants? Like last year I grew like basil and tomatoes and did really well, but then I had garlic and I planted, there was some space, so I put some bean plants in and they just were eaten up. And then I looked and it said that those two don't go well together.
Oh, yeah,
So
you're talking about interplanting.
Yeah, interplanting.
Yeah. I've not had much experience with that. No, can't really speak to that. I do sometimes, I put what's called double rows, 2 rows close together. I can have 2 rows of green beans 30 inches apart. I can have a double row and allow for a wider area for it to grow. And I can get more when in my other house where I used to live. Space is a limiting factor, so I wouldn't use double rows like that. Then I would cultivate between the double rows with a with a tiller, if I had a tiller, or just with a hoe.
For anybody who might be interested, I have a guide that I got from the Boston Gardening Association. They gave it to me because I was doing some gardening with students at school, and it gives you the companion, it gives you a lot of information about companion plants, particularly for New England. So I'm willing to share if anybody is interested.
Yeah, what do you think of putting down, like, I've driven on Route 117 going to Lancaster, and you'll see these farms, and then you'll see this big strip of plastic, black plastic matting that goes down, and then you'll see plants just pop, pop in so many feet.
There's two kinds of plastic. One is a solid sheet of plastic, and then there's the other kind that are porous, allows the water to get through. I'm not used to it, but it must be worthwhile for them to make that investment to do it.
Yeah.
It would cut, you only have a small area the plant comes up, it would cut the amount of cultivation and weeding that would be required for that plant.
I just watched a video on YouTube called Back to Eden, where one of the methods they did is put newspaper, like, in the garden area, and then put compost and soil on top, and then grew the plants in there. I was just wondering how effective that is.
I think it's fairly effective. I've heard people use it. I've not tried it myself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things that are done.
I have a guy that uses, where he has a business, he uses waste cardboard, and he puts the cardboard down, lets it rain on top of it, gets it soft and pliable, and makes a layer, and then he puts other stuff on top of it, but he uses cardboard.
Well, the cardboard is made out of plant material, plant
Yeah, the
fiber.
only thing I'm afraid of is it's like recycled multiple times, you don't know what's in that
You
cardboard.
don't know what's in it, yeah.
That's what I told him. I said, "How are you sure that
It breaks down and adds organic matter to the soil, but yeah, what else is in it?
what's in there, yeah. what
Yeah,
kind of
that's right, yeah.
glues and all
Planting the garden and timing is important. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention that I've been using the Back to the Eden method for the last, 4 or 5 years now, and I
Yeah.
find it to be remarkable. And the only thing is that, you're going to have a tree come up from time to time, because you don't know what type of chips you're getting for the most part, but it reduces my weeding, it reduces my watering, it reduces the insect population, so I think there's a lot of benefits to it, and it makes sense too, because even when your soil is exposed to the sun is robbing that soil of its nutrients without even, just having to sit stagnant for the most part. But I love it, and I think I'm going to continue
Yeah,
doing
from
it.
the standpoint of conserving soil moisture and weed control, it sounds like a good way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mentioned frost dates. That affects your timing of planting. Some plants, which are cool season growers, that is, they tolerate cooler weather, you can set out earlier than the last frost, or seed before the last frost. But things like corn are very sensitive to frost. But interesting thing about corn is once it comes up, every 3 days you get a new leaf starts coming up. And those first 7 leaves can be hit with frost and not kill the plant. The growing point is down in the soil. After the 7th leaf, the growing point moves above ground. For frost, that's the end of it. So you can plant corn. Say your average frost day here in the spring is the 10th of May. You can plant it the last of April, even April 25th. And unless you get an extreme late frost, like I mentioned, the 17th of May.
Like when you're planting your garden, for example, I don't like to plant corn because you're only going to get 2 ears per stalk, and if you've got a limited amount of space, and for the time that you invest in it, it seems like a waste.
In a way, you're right. If you have a limited space, there's some crops you don't. Pumpkins take a lot of space, corn, there's another one I can't think of right now. You may want to opt out of not growing those and buy them from someone else that produces them.
So if you have a limited amount of space, what is your best bet, like, for maximum yield? Because I saw a book in the library, it says like on a 20 by 20 piece of land, I could raise enough food to feed my family. And I don't see how that's possible. So from your experience, if you have like a 20 by 20 acre lots of 400 square feet, what would be the best?
That's really intense area of growing. This would be, really, what do you want? Do you want tomatoes?
10.
Or maximum, we're just looking for maximum yield.
Okay, on the back side, you could grow green, on the north side, you could grow pole-type green beans. So they grow up the poles, and they go up to 10 feet. I've seen them, 10 feet high. You might need a ladder to harvest them. So that's an area, and that's another concept of gardening. It's called vertical gardening. That's done in areas that are very confining too. By the way, this particular green bean is Roma 2 is a bush type. It doesn't grow up a pole. It may grow up this high, but it tends to stay low. It is a low variety.
My family and I, we had a lot of success with tomatoes, and we'd have like a cone-shaped, like a metal. I think the tomatoes would grow along like the metal.
Cage.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, the cages hold the plant up, and actually tomatoes are a vining plant, and in the tropics they'll grow 2 or 3 or 4 years. They continue to vine. So where we're growing them here, we're managing them different than what their natural habit is.
I have a guy, or maybe Dave talking about, what I've seen it done where they just put down hay and they just let the tomatoes lay on the ground. They don't worry about them growing up, and they just grow their tomato crop flat.
Yeah, as long as it's off the ground.
Yeah,
So
they put
it's
it
on
on
the soil,
hay, use hay.
the tomatoes will tend to rot, where it's suspended off, they're not moist.
Sometimes, in reference to this gentleman's question about the tomatoes, sometimes if I have like a couple of tomato plants left over, what I'll do is I'll throw them in the compost bin, because during the summer, I have a couple compost bins and one that I keep stagnant for the summer, and I just throw the plants on top of that, and the tomatoes that come off it, they act as a vine, they enshroud the whole bin, and there's some of the best tomatoes that I've ever grown, and just leave them right on the compost bin.
They're really getting the nutrition there,
Yeah, unbelievable,
Yeah.
unbelievable. And the thing is, because they vine over, a lot of the birds won't get inside it to pick at them and stuff, and they're perfect.
I was at a strip mine site in eastern Kentucky, and they hydroseed. This one particular operation got a lot of rewards because they stayed right up close to the mining operation, kept everything under cover so it would reduce erosion. Some of the places they don't, and they have problems. But I was on there looking at some plots we had, and was driving through tomatoes. So I stopped. There were these cherry tomatoes. And all I could think of is either someone threw a couple tomatoes into the hydroseeder. Maybe it fell in accidentally. I don't know how, but they were there. And I come back later on and got a couple bags, lunch bags of tomatoes. It was mixed in with a mulch that they shoot on a mulch seed mixture. It's colored green. You can see the